Thomas Jefferson's dates are 1743 to 1826. Jefferson attended a local ministry for grade school and went to the College of William and Mary to study math and philosophy. In college, Jefferson met William Small, who introduced him to Locke's ideas. He was profoundly influenced by Locke's writings. In the early 1770s, Jefferson and the Founding Fathers were concerned with creating a political system independent of England's monarchy, a system based on the rightful liberty of every individual. Like Locke, Jefferson felt that no man ought to harm another, and thus he penned the Declaration of Independence. In this, he wrote this to identify, protect, and defend Locke's natural rights. In reading from the Declaration of Independence, he wrote, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by the Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed." Jefferson identifies man's rights as unalienable, that is, inseparable from his nature. And further, he identifies the proper purpose of government, to secure and defend these rights. This was the moral principle this country was founded on, the principle of individual rights, which subordinated the government to protection of the rights of each individual. This was indeed a revolutionary concept. Every political system prior to America had subordinated the individual to some higher authority, to a god, to a monarchy, to a king, to the elite, to the state, to the people. America turned that upside down. Now, the individual stood sovereign. The government was simply to be regarded as a function of the individual. The Declaration and the subsequent Bill of Rights gave birth to the unalienable rights of every man and woman, to be free and to be able to pursue their happiness. As a result, the Civil War, which would come 80 years later, was inevitable. African Americans were individuals. How was it possible to keep them in slavery? In a country founded on freedom, it wasn't. And in 1862, Abraham Lincoln defeated the South and passed the Emancipation Proclamation, effectively ending slavery. Very often, this country is criticized, as many of our founding fathers owned slaves. But make no mistake, our founding fathers risked everything to see their vision of a free country made real. And as such, it was only a matter of time until their heroic actions ended slavery. America was the first country, by principle, to abolish slavery forever on American soil. Since the signing of the Declaration of Independence, African Americans were not the only class of individuals to be discriminated against. Women, as a group, had been denied the right to vote. As early as 1838, Angelina Grimke spoke before the Massachusetts legislature, stating, "Because voting is a political subject, it has often tauntingly been said that women have nothing to do with it. Are we aliens because we are women? Are we bereft of citizenship because we are mothers, wives, and daughters of a mighty people?" In the early 1990s, Elizabeth Stanton, Susan B. Anthony, Alice Paul, and Lucy Burns became the faces of multiple associations promoting the right for women to vote. They did this through one of the most famous feminist groups, the National Women's Party. The mission of this party, fueled by both men and women, was to promote the Equal Rights Amendment to the Constitution. Years of parading through the streets of America were coming down to this very moment, where women going to be recognized as individuals? Were they going to be able to exercise the right to vote as all men in America? After years of demonstrating to have their right to vote, women were finally recognized as individuals. And on August 18, 1920, President Woodrow Wilson passed the 19th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, which reads as follows: "The right of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of sex." Thinking back to the questions I opened my presentation with, who would say our founding principles rightfully helped abolish slavery? And would you agree that our founding principles rightfully enabled women to be able to vote? Why do I say rightfully? What makes those rights real? I submit that these rights are real because they sanction the freedom to act. They are rights to liberty. For rights to be proper, one man's rights cannot violate another's, as rights to freedom are for everyone. Freeing African Americans and giving women the right to vote violates no one else's rights, just as today, the issue of same-sex marriage falls into the same category. One person's right to marry another violates no one's rights, and therefore is a real and natural right, as viewed through the lens of our founding principles. But what about the right to handicap rails? Is this a natural right? Or what of the right to equal pay and free health care? Is that what our founders intended? Are these rights freedoms to act, or are they something different? In 1929, America was thrust into the depths of the Great Depression. Unemployment rates skyrocketed to nearly 25% of the population. Franklin Roosevelt became president in 1933, immediately enacting his New Deal. As a part of this New Deal, Roosevelt stated that he was catering to the needs of the American people by establishing programs like the Work Projects Administration Relief Program, programs to aid tenant farmers and migrant workers, and the Social Security Act of 1936. These were argued for on the basis of bettering the American people in times of great hardship. Americans were put to work by the government, building bridges, roads, parks, and other infrastructure. Welfare programs were set up across the country. The Social Security Act was passed to create equality among everyone in America by using payroll taxes to provide money and insurances to the elderly, to the poor, and to the unemployed. This was not the first instance of welfare being introduced to a country to keep its citizens happy. Welfare dates back to the 1840s under Chancellor Otto von Bismarck in Germany. Bismarck created a system of welfare for the German people, introducing age-old pensions, accident insurance, medical care, and unemployment insurance. Roosevelt brought Bismarck's welfare policies to the United States, and since then, the function and purpose of government has taken a radical turn. Did our founders intend for Americans to have the right to such welfare programs? The beginning of the 1960s ushered in a new wave of women's demands. As more and more women were entering the workforce, the feminist movement sought equal pay. There was a real disparity between the wages of men and women, and so the women's movement set about to correct what they saw as an injustice. The women's movement triumphed again when President John F. Kennedy oversaw the passing of the Equal Pay Act of 1963, which prohibits discrimination on account of sex in the payment of wages by employers engaged in commerce. With the right to equal pay now won, women's groups sought even more. The second wave feminists believed they were entitled to equal opportunity, free contraceptives, free child care provision, and free abortions. The most famous leader of this movement, Betty Friedan, created the NOW Party, the National Organization for Women, to help promote this list of new rights for women. During this time, President Kennedy had passed legislators for a different kind of welfare program, health insurance for the aged. This was first proposed by President Harry S. Truman in 1945, where he outlined a comprehensive prepaid medical insurance program for all people in the Social Security system. It wasn't until 1965, some 20 years later, that President Lyndon B. Johnson signed the Medicare and Medicaid bill into law, with the former President Harry S. Truman at his side, Truman being the first person to receive a Medicare card. Medicare was to provide health insurance to the elderly, and Medicaid